Welcome to the Love Positivism podcast. I'm Shireen Oberg, and I'm a yoga teacher and author devoted to the path of healing and heart-based living. And I want to help you to step into what you truly are and to your highest potential. On this podcast, I share with you tools and insights to help you move ever forward on your spiritual and healing path. With guests from all over the world, from different wisdom traditions, I wish to create a web of loving energy that permeates the whole world to create more love and peace. You can connect with me on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube for more guidance and love. Hello to all you loving beings. Thank you so much for being here. On this week's episode, I have the beautiful Meggan Watterson as my guest, and she's been such an inspiration to me, and what she's been sharing about Mary Magdalene has really been such a heart-opening experience for me. And she's the author of Reveal, the Sutras of Unspeakable Joy, the Divine Feminine Oracle, and Mary Magdalene Revealed. And she's the co-author of How to Love Yourself and Sometimes Other People. She's a feminist theologian with a Master of Theological Studies from Harvard Divinity School and a Master of Divinity from Union Theological Seminary at Columbia University. Meggan facilitates the REDLADIES, a community of radical love that lets her preach about female saints, mystics, gurus, and poets who inspire and teach us to live in service of love. She also leads retreats and workshops on the Divine Feminine, Mary Magdalene, and the Soul Voice meditation. And she has been such truly an inspiration for so many women in the work that she's doing, and how she's really revealing these hidden teachings of these divine feminine beings and goddesses and saints. So this episode was really special to me, and I was so happy to talk with her because I've been reading Mary Magdalene Revealed, which has such amazing and inspiring and loving words in it, and it's been so blessed to learn so much from her. And I'm really excited to also share that next Monday, on the 31st, I have a workshop on the Mind, Body, Spirit Festival. I've been sharing it on Instagram. It's a beautiful festival where I will hold a workshop all about releasing the veils of illusion for you to remember what you truly are. And in this workshop, I will share the yogic philosophy, Vedantic philosophy behind this, and how it's said that we are living in a veil of illusion with our sensory experience, and we can find back to our true essence through meditation. We will do meditation and learn mantras to come back to ourselves, and it's a great way to release if we have any attachments that we are trying to release now, especially when we're in this eclipse season. If we want to release old thought patterns and things that we are holding on to that are not serving us. So that's going to be on Monday. You can connect with me or just go to Mind, Body, Spirit Festival. It's going to be an online workshop, and you're very welcome to come. And I'm so excited that it's less than a month left now until my book is released, and there's so many of you that have been pre-ordering the book. I'm so grateful for that, and I'm still doing oracle card readings for those that pre-order the book. So if you do pre-order it, connect with me on Instagram or email me at lovepositivism@gmail.com, and I will do the reading for you. And lastly, I want to really thank my show partners, Ace of Air. They are sponsoring this episode. They are the first and only fully circular beauty and wellness brand with a line of clean, vegan skincare and supplements that have been synergistically formulated at the intersection of herbalist wisdom and modern science, focusing on rituals that work from the inside out. You can learn more if you visit aceofair.com. They're really taking care of Mother Nature, Mother Earth with their philosophy and their mission. So I'm truly happy to have their support in my work and to support them as well. And on Instagram, you can also find them if you search for Ace of Air. So I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. And if you do have any feedback or comments, you can either leave your rating or review on iTunes. That means so much to me. And you can also connect with me on Instagram. So enjoy this week's episode. Hi, Meggan. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. And I'm so excited to talk to you today. And I always start by asking my podcast guests to share any type of daily mindfulness practice that is within your practice, or something that you want to share that takes you back to your body and the present moment.
I practice something called the 3 breaths, which is a part of the soul voice meditation, which is also something I practice daily. But the 3 breaths is something that I practice more than just once. Like, I pretty much practice it throughout the day. And it's very simple. It's just taking a first intentional breath. And with that breath, you imagine your consciousness. You just imagine an anchor sort of dropping you from out of the mind, out of your thoughts, out of the ego, down into the heart. And then you take a second intentional breath from within the heart. And with that breath, you are connecting to the absolute truth of who you are. You are connecting to the essence of your soul. And that connection then is what you bring with you when you take your third intentional breath. And then you open your eyes back up again if you've closed them, and you have that sense of being realigned. And the 3 breaths really serve as the for me, that's the core of the soul voice meditation. But I use the 3 breaths more often all throughout the day. For example, before having a conversation with someone, before going to pick up my son, and getting myself from out of my head or where I may have been, and making certain I'm really anchored in my heart when I encounter him or anyone else that I may throughout the day.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I love that, because I think working with our breathing and our breath it's a free and simple tool that we can use every day to come back, slow down, or even energize if we need to do that. I mean, in the pranayama work, we do both ways, but usually we need to slow down and become very conscious. And I think something that I really love with this practice that you just shared is that sometimes I say to the students in a yoga class to bring down their consciousness into their heart. So I think with the breath, it makes it more tangible and easier to visualize that, right?
Exactly. And it sounds very simple because it is. However, it has the power to transform your entire life. Because when we are present as we're living our life, that is when we can make new choices.
Yeah, that's very true. Thank you for sharing that. And I would love for you to introduce yourself to the listeners, who you are and what you do and what your life's mission has been so far?
I am a author and a feminist theologian, and I've been incredibly blessed from the fact that since I was a very, very young girl, I just always knew, as in the Greek word gnosis, knew, direct experience. I knew that the purpose or the mission, the thing really that lit me up the most, either enraged me the most or fascinated me the most. Like, what was most gripping to me was the voice of women within religion. And it began in a Sunday school class at a very liberal Christian denomination. It's called Unitarianism here in the States. And my mom, who's a feminist, had suggested that I go because I wouldn't stop talking about, like, where did we come from before we were here? Where do we go when we die? Like, what happens to the body? Is there something more than the body? Like, just this constant barrage of questions. And so she suggested that I start going to the Sunday school classes. And when I encountered the New Testament for the first time, I broke out in hives. And this, to me, was the beginning of a truth I really had to live into, which was that the body never lies. I broke out in hives and I wasn't entirely sure why, but I was also incredibly angry at the way that we were missing women's voices. We were missing their stories, their direct experiences, and that God was portrayed and understood to be male and masculine only. And also the interpretation of Christ as this savior, and all that I was learning about Christianity with the aspect of it that would say, Christ would condemn same-sex unions. Christ would condemn sex outside of marriage, or the dogma of Christianity. Just it was as if I knew a different template. It was as if I had already experienced a completely different understanding of Christ. And so when I met up against that one, the only thing my body knew to do was completely go haywire. And so I left the church just a wreck, literally, like full-blown hives, sobbing. And I never went back. However, I never gave up on that moment. I never gave up on trying to figure out why I had such a powerful response to my first encounter with Christianity.
That is so interesting. And there was this, it sounds like there was a strong remembrance, and just something, this triggering you was also what led you on the path that you're on. So it was like
Right.
your body speaking your soul through these
Right.
these physical things. And I really, I so understand exactly what you're saying, because I always had as a child, I always was into a little bit like these odd, mysterious books and things like that no one else seemed to read, but I loved. And when I was a teenager, I had a deep, it was actually around my grandfather passing that I had a deep just connection with everything. And I started feeling for the first time that I I believed in God and what it means and all of this. And but still I was in a so my parents were not religious, but they were from Kurdistan, so they were their religion was Islam, and but not practicing, or we were more mostly a spiritual family, like most Kurdish people, and but as time went, and I started also on my journey, on my spiritual path, I had this longing to be in devotion. And even so much that I thought maybe I should become like a Christian nun because I wanted to be like in full, like, how can I be in full devotion? But something was not like completely right. It was still something that did not feel perfect for me. And it wasn't until I like gained more and more knowledge about these concepts and yeah, these religions that has been very predominant, the monotheistic religions, that there's such a strong patriarchal influence in it, as you describe also in your book. And I've been learning so much from your book, like why has it been like that? And it's colored by the societies that have spread this. And when I the first time encountered a deity that was a goddess in a drum circle, I really felt like I found something that I could relate to so much more. So I totally understand. It is so beautiful, the teachings of Jesus and the teachings of Mary Magdalene, and it hasn't been so I also want to share this because just coincidentally I was watching this week different documentaries about different Christian groups in the US, actually, because in Sweden it's pretty secular. We don't have that much of, most people don't believe anything, or we're still nature worshippers, because people in Sweden love to go out whenever it's warm, because like today it was like really warm, everyone is out, but we don't understand that we're worshiping nature. We think that it's just because it's warm. And yeah, these documentaries were portraying, it was different documentaries, and one was like these really I think it was a group of, I can't remember, but they were more fundamentalists, and some groups were more extreme, but everyone was telling different stories of what the Bible says, like, oh yeah, the Bible says that we can't have cell phones, and the other one says, yeah, if you're like, it's like it's colored by the society so much, so we can't really know anything until we start diving deep and understanding things for ourselves. So I thought that was very interesting to see societies where it's so strong.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know where I was going with this, but I thought that what you just described also in your upbringing and everything, that your reaction to it. So when you dedicated yourself to becoming this more feministic theologian, what did you discover, and did you study many different cultures and different religions from all over the world? Maybe you want to share that.
Yeah, I started with trying to find the voice of women, and as you mentioned, stories of goddess or female Buddhas, for example, throughout world religions. So I went to Harvard Divinity to be able to do a comparative study of where exactly these female and feminine forms of the divine were, and what wisdom did they have to share. And so most of that I compiled into my first book, Reveal, and then also an oracle that I created called the Divine Feminine Oracle. And those were the holy ladies and the sacred rebels that I came across that began to really transform my life, because it validated what I was hearing and experiencing inside of me. So I wasn't finding it in traditional patriarchal world religions, but in these voices of female mystics and saints and gurus and poets. Even many of the poets were revolutionary, and throughout the different world religions and throughout history, they've always existed, and they've been talking about a capacity for every one of us to be able to access a truth within us. So this idea of returning to the heart and there being able to connect directly to the divine. And so when I finished that degree, I felt like I had the, it's like I felt like I had this support system. I had behind me, going all the way back, all these different saints and mystics that would go with me into seminary, because I knew I had to go back to the Christian tradition. I just wanted to first immerse myself in the voices of the divine feminine so that I could handle why I had such a visceral physical reaction to Christianity as a little girl. And so then I went to, it's called Union Theological Seminary in New York City at Columbia. And that's, seminary is the formal training that any minister has to undergo before leading a church. I knew I was going to go for my own research. I knew I was never going to be ordained. I wanted to go and figure out what happened to the voice of women within Christianity. Mm-hmm. And I felt capable emotionally, and as a scholar, I felt capable of doing it after my research at Harvard. And so I went to the Christian tradition then and studied for 3 years, really immersing myself in the texts, many of which were considered Gnostic texts. And what that means is that there are these scriptures from before the 4th century. They date between the 1st and the 3rd century, and they are early Christian scriptures that from the 4th century onward, the Christian Bible was created in the 4th century. And there were many of those scriptures that were deemed Gnostic that were not included. And what I was so curious about was, why weren't these scriptures included? If they were just as historically valid, and if they were just as much as a part of the Christian tradition before the 4th century, why weren't they included? And what I found was that these quote unquote Gnostic scriptures, what they had in common is that they validated that message that the truth is within, the kingdom of God is within. And they validated that no human being is ever unworthy of God. Like, there's absolutely nothing, not our sex, our sexuality, our gender, nothing. Like, there's nothing that could ever prove or merit some sort of unworthiness to God. That didn't exist. And that women were a central part of this early, what I refer to, and many other scholars refer to as Christ movement, after his crucifixion. There was also within the scriptures, like the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Thomas, and the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, there was the emphasis on Christ and Mary as partners, that they were meant to be seen as a, teaching together. It wasn't meant to be viewed as Christ singular. It was meant to be viewed as Christ and Mary. There was something very important and significant that we needed to witness, and are still meant to witness, in seeing his teachings coupled with hers. And so her gospel became a central focus of mine then for the remainder of my work. And once I finished the academic work, then I started on pilgrimages to also personally devote myself to her legend, right? Because scripture only takes us so far in word. Then we have to go to another place in soul and with our physical being. So I went to the south of France and several times, and wanted to be able to return, in a sense. Obviously, I'm a Midwestern, girl from the United States, born into a very secular family. But when I went to the south of France, I felt very much as if I could remember more of what I meant to, who I'm meant to be, and of what I'm meant to do, and really also the teachings in Mary's gospel. I felt like I understood them not just in an academic way, but from within my heart.
Yeah, wow. It's everything that you're speaking about and your journey. It's so beautiful, and the way you also presented all of this so I've been reading Mary Magdalene Revealed. I definitely want to read Revealed as well. And it's so interesting that how would it have been if everything had been included from the beginning? Because
Right.
it just feels like almost two different religions, but it's not.
Yeah.
And in the end, it's not. It's so to me, it's so, like, I've always thought that knowledge is like key. You can, like, when we know things, it can be from the heart or from the mind, but all types of knowledge is like gateways that open up something bigger for us. And when we narrow it to just say, but only this is right, in when we talk about in Vedanta, it's like you've probably also studied that since you've been, like just this non-duality. So it's really, like, from a yogic standpoint, very rajastic to be so discriminating that you only think that the way you interpret something is right, because and at the same time also, when you don't have all the information, you don't have the full spectrum of what happened, the stories and everything. And I think that's what's really like your book has really put another piece of the puzzle. I think also it's a more loving, so also in Hinduism and what we learn in now the yoga lineage that I'm in is this path of devotion, and bhakti is really, it comes from the heart, right? And it's like the easiest way. So why has everything been so it's been like the opposite way? It feels like if you're putting fear into someone about what would happen if you're not conforming to these rules or having that exact belief system, then it doesn't come from the heart anymore. Then it comes from your mind and your subconscious fears and fear of ending up somewhere. And I feel like it's so hard to have these types of conversations with very like more narrow minded and maybe not narrow minded, but more that you're so into one thing that it's like saying, no, I only I don't know, I only eat this, never eat anything else. It's why? And then when we practice, like when we're in kirtan and all of this, we even mention, like it's not only Hinduism, it's all religions, all prophets, all saints, people who have been on this planet that have been masters in some way. It's so interesting. Like I can't stop being interested in all of them. So I think that it's we all have different paths. I have full respect and understanding that you're very like if someone is very passionate, but when it goes wrong is when there's judgment, and if you say that the way you believe and think is the only way to heaven, then that's judgment, but you don't think it's judgment, but it is judgment.
Right. And ultimately what it comes down to is the ego, which Mary's gospel addresses so well. It's about power. It's about those external powers that convince us, that somebody is less than what we are or who we are. And what's so fascinating to me in my research about why those, like for example, the Gospel of Mary, or another scripture that I'm so passionate about, the Acts of Paul and Thecla, because in the same way that Christ had Mary as a companion, Paul had Thecla as a spiritual companion. And even non-Christians have heard about Paul the Apostle, but almost no one, not even Christians, have heard about Thecla. And so it's that erasure of the female and the feminine counterpart that really helps us to understand the power dynamic that was at play when in the 4th century the Bible was being chosen, like which gospels were chosen, and how the story, what Harvard scholar Karen King refers to as the master story, of Christ and God the Father and salvation only through Christ the Son, how that master story was developed had everything to do with the Roman Empire's structure of power and authority that already existed, which was that learned, educated men, landowning, educated men were up at the top, and women and slaves were down at the bottom. But what Christ was so concerned about, and what those early Christians that were a part of the Christ movement, which scripture like the Gospel of Mary articulates, what they were interested in was something so radical and dangerous to the Roman Empire that if you said you were Christian before the 4th century, you were murdered, you were killed, you were put in the arena and sacrificed. So it was so threatening because Christ and those early Christians wanted to make the first last and the last first. They wanted to say that there is no human being ever created in any time that doesn't also have this capacity to embody the divine. We are all, that is the ultimate power, right? We think that power exists outside of us. We think that power exists in this emperor, who is at the top, who was basically the God. There was to be no power greater than Caesar. And what Christ was saying is actually there is a power greater than Caesar. Not only that, it's love. And not only that, it exists within all of us equally. And that was like, because then we would each have to see each other as brother and sister. We would each have to literally treat each other as our neighbor, no matter who we are or where we come from or what's happened to us, what occupation we have, how we support ourselves. It would transcend every class, everything that the ego has created to align someone with a position of power. It just gets eliminated, because it's saying, whether you're a slave or you're Caesar, you have this kingdom of God within you, right? So there's an essential part of every one of us that is absolutely equal.
Yeah, and when we're truly in that understanding, then we start like separating ourselves and dividing up, and this mentality of us and them, which has been going on for so long. And we can see also this how this has affected like the cultures in Europe. And I've been reflecting also on, like here in Sweden, that is really, like nature-based in origins. Maybe you studied that as well. It was like these very wise women and men, what happened to them during the time of, there's different places in Stockholm where there was burning or killing of these because they were practicing something that was ancient, and that has
can't be controlled. You can't control somebody who knows that they have direct access to the divine from within them. You can't control them, because there's nothing you can sell them or convince them of. Like they, the temple is within. So you can't control or manipulate a person who has woken to that great big unsayable love inside of them.
And that actually, that what you're saying is also a key to releasing a lot of fears, and also being able to perceive the world in a almost like always in an objective way, instead of becoming one with everything that's happening in the world. And of course everything affects us, but we can also take a step back, and from that space in the heart, then everything else can dissolve, because in there's like, we're just filled up. It's always like full. So it's really beautiful. And I think that what's happening right now I think that we're awakening the consciousness and the remembrance of, especially in our cultures. Even, I mean, if you look at older religions, and that has always, the feminine has been always present. And then when we look back, like even more ancient times, like the goddesses and all of this, it was like a natural thing to. So if we were just a new people on earth, and I see myself and my body, and I see a man, and then it's natural to understand that also
there would be both.
Exactly. It's natural. And I was listening to a Vedantic scholar, and he said, Swami actually, and he said, so when we're thinking about the divine, and we don't say that God, the Father, was laying there and birthing life. It's the mother. So it was such a good, the way he said it was so beautiful, that it must be a divine feminine aspect, the Shakti, or the universal womb. It's like it's two different energies. And what I love is that you have merged these two. And when I'm reading your book now, I'm really thinking about it was also a drum journey, I think, but we were supposed to. So in the very first one I did a couple of years ago, I saw Goddess Ishtar, but I didn't know who she was. I have only heard that name because I had a friend with that name when I was a child. So when I saw her and the symbolics and I searched, like Googled everything, I was really first scared and then shocked. And then I'm like, okay, so I'm getting this. And maybe it's from my physical ancestry as well. And then a couple of years later, we were supposed to meet guides during a journey. And I thought, okay, maybe I'll meet like someone that I know or an angel or something. I had no idea what I was going to meet. And I wake up in this journey on a beach and I see a person coming towards me. And I'm just like, what is that? Who is that? And I, it sounds crazy, but first I saw Jesus. And as I said, I'm not religious. I don't even have a Christian background. And then as he walked towards me, he shape-shift into Mother Mary. And then when she came even closer, she shape-shift into Mary Magdalene. And that's such a beautiful trinity, like the Mother of God. And birthing, I don't know, it was so beautiful and so symbolic. And when I'm reading your book, it reminds me of that as well.
Yes, there's so much that we lost without those scriptures that were, deemed heretical in the 4th century. There's so much we lost that he left to Mary Magdalene. So, and to me, that vision, what it speaks of is that lineage of love that he left through her gospel. And it's a very unique message because it's a message that the disciples would have had to learn and embody in order to receive in real time. Because at the end of her gospel, Peter questions everything she's revealed to them, which were these visions actually that she had of Christ. And in the vision, she asked Christ, how is it that I'm able to see you? Like with what human aperture, with what aspect of my being, like, how is it that I can see you in a vision? And Christ says it's neither with the soul nor the spirit, but with the mind between the two. But in its original form, that word mind in English is somewhat lost in translation, but the original in Greek is nous, nu, which means the highest aspect of the soul or the spiritual eye of the heart. So there is a capacity that we all contain, which I would say is a feminine attribute that we all, no matter what, how we understand our sex or gender, it's something that's innate to being human. We can access this power of vision. And Mary reveals in her gospel that that's how she receives these secret teachings from Christ, is from within this spiritual eye of the heart. That's how she sees it. And Peter at the end, who becomes one of the foundations of what would become, the Petrine school of it's very much the patriarchal understanding of Christianity. He doubts her and says, so are we to think that Christ gave Mary, a woman, these teachings and didn't tell us? So basically he's pointing out that system of power, right? That hierarchy that he was still functioning within, that he had more power. He was somehow more worthy than Mary would have been. And one of the other disciples, Levi, comes to her defense, and that's exactly what he says. He says, if the Savior considered her worthy, then who are you to disregard her? So it's that worth. And what's so phenomenal is that they would have had to understand that she was worthy, right? She wasn't less than them in order for them to believe her and to receive those teachings. But they couldn't, obviously. They didn't. And her gospel wasn't included. And then in the 4th century, and then by the 6th century, the story had been rewritten that she was the penitent prostitute, and the faithful were to refer to her as the penitent prostitute, which was all a fiction, and the Catholic Church has apologized for that. But not until not until 1969. So that for millennia, she was misunderstood, and what we lost is that validation of that direct connection, like what you experienced. It's like so many of us would discount that then and say like, oh, it's just my imagination. Oh, it was something I ate, or, oh, I must have seen a movie that made me, and we discount it. It's so hard to believe that we could ever be that powerful, right? That we could close our eyes, go into the heart, and receive a message directly from the divine. Like, that's so hard for us to understand, because we've really believed that system of hierarchical power, that to the extent that we think an angel would be above us, or we think God is above us, we think, someone in power is above us. We think these things, and they keep us from hearing what is, often repeating itself as if a loudspeaker from within us, but we don't hear it and we don't recognize it because it's so hard for us to understand that we are directly connected to something greater than we could ever imagine.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think when we're only following and not listen, it can be so as well. It's really hard to, let's say that you have a 56th sense and you can feel spirits around you. It's really hard to convince someone else,
right?
Start having that belief system, but also even understanding how it feels or what it means. And it's the same with this, what you're saying, because you can believe in the spirits, but if you haven't had that experience, you don't really know. Then you just follow what someone else is saying to you, right?
Right. And you're articulating the definition of gnosis so perfectly, because that gnosis isn't just learning something, like apprehending it intellectually, someone telling you something, and then it. Gnosis is having that direct experience. So you know something in a way where no one else has to know it for you.
Yeah. And that's the whole purpose of when we're actually, we don't know it, but when we're practicing really meditation and really going within, that's the purpose. It's not to conform to what others are saying. And also I love this thought of having a devotional practice that everyone can have really unique and their own practices. And why would that be bad? Because we're all different shapes, colors, sizes. So why can't we worship in different ways? It's all the same. So I think that what's sad is that we still, after 2000 years, have this patriarchal way. And many countries, I mean, there's so many countries that are still in that, and it's both cultural and it's mostly a human instinct thing. It's no religion has, I don't know, maybe some sects maybe, but they can't be religions that are only based on that. It's like cultures and people's egos, like you said, that have shaped that. So it's really sad. But what I love is that now, as we're more liberated and we're going into these new paradigms and we're really in there, there's so many that are, and especially those that have felt like, we have been spiritual, but not felt like really that anything fits our own knowing, that now we can get these things revealed to us that is so important.
Yeah, it's so exciting for me as a scholar that these scriptures, which were ordered to be destroyed in the 4th century, but we've been finding them since 1945. That was one of the biggest findings. It's called in Nag Hammadi, Egypt. That was right after World War II. There was this huge finding of various scriptures. The Gospel of Mary wasn't found there, but the Gospel of Mary, the 3 fragments that we have of her gospel, were found also in Egypt and along the Nile, buried in urns and buried in caves. So there were monks who refused to follow through with that edict that went out, and instead they safeguarded them. They buried them in the hope that, hundreds of years later, we would uncover their truth. And it's fascinating to me, or how I've interpreted that, is that we're ready to embrace the fullness of what Christ's message might have been, and the possibility of what a practice may have been in relation to Christ. Because so much of the focus has been about the dogma and the rules and the judgment, and whereas what these scriptures that were ordered to be destroyed, what they emphasize is the practice of going inward, the practice of what in Greek it's referred to as the kenotic path, and kenosis means self-emptying love. So it's allowing the ego to slip away so that we can we can return again to the heart and fill with love. So we let go of the ego and we return again to the heart. And this is what the first Christians were practicing. So for me as a scholar, it became less and less about, what could have been, and more about what we can still try, like what we can still put into practice now that we have Mary's voice, Mary's gospel. Now that we have evidence of this other form of Christianity that was being practiced before the 4th century, before it was institutionalized, before Christianity became what it is today. It was very much a practice of putting love first, of every single day looking to see the way that the ego may be guiding us and returning instead to the heart.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That was beautiful. And I'm also just curious, what I've noticed is that, so for example, in Catholicism, the Catholics are still having the aspect of Mother Mary, for example, in their prayers and all of this. But in what I've seen here in Sweden, since it's a Protestantic country, there's like if you go to a church, it's barely that you see anything like that. So what is that something that was was it so that for a long time at least Mother Mary was like an important figure, and then this movement removed her, or do you know this?
That division was about the way that the Catholics worship Mary as a saint, worship and various other saints. And that movement wanted to do away with the idling, the worship of idols is how it was described. And so there was a focus more on just the teachings of Christ, and not emphasizing so much the adoration of Mother Mary. The issue with how Mother Mary, the sort of dualistic situation that was created within the Catholic Church and that still exists today, is that Mother Mary became the Immaculate, and then Mary Magdalene became the whore. So it was this dualistic split. And so a human woman is caught then between these two it's like one or the other, you know. There wasn't this understanding that Mary, the Mother Mary, had been a mother, like had actually been a human woman who gave birth to Christ. She became immaculate, but that didn't happen to hundreds of years after she was alive. And that was a part of the there was a real purpose in creating that duality. It was to further emphasize that women were unfit for positions of spiritual authority within the Catholic Church. And so, you know, that dynamic, unfortunately, is still very much a part of women's psyches, and has been something that we've needed to heal from. This idea that somehow our sexuality could in any way take from the power of who we are, the worth of who we are. And that's definitely been a form of control for women, judging women around that, and keeping women from exploring their power within their sexuality.
Yeah, it's been really like controlling this, which is like it's like taking something sacred and divine and making it into taboo, and
right
like taking it to the other extreme end. And I've seen that because also in the cultures that I come from is really it's a very big issue, and how this is still happening in these cultures, and it's so
where a woman's worth is connected to her virginity, or it's it's connected to the way that she's going to be a mother, and then, you know, give children to the patrilineal line. I mean, this is a very current stronghold, this image, this idea that a woman's worth is connected to her sexuality, and then how to control it, you know, through these ideas.
And it's so strange, because when I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking about the whole creation story, and the apple and the serpent and all of this, it's like that's where it started, because it's so connected with the feminine and all of these symbols, and how that there's so much power within the female body and the womb, which is going through cycles every month when we're in that period of our lives, and then how powerful that is, and how afraid this wounded masculine embodiments must be to experience that fierceness. But I think it's so contradicting also, because, you know, as women, we're supposed to look a certain way, please a certain way, and all of this, but at the same time not. So it's like everything is so contradicting,
right?
And that's why what's happening now, if we can't honor and acknowledge that there is a divinity in both aspects, then we can't acknowledge that here on earth, and we can't take care of Mother Earth, because that's a very divine feminine aspect, like really physical embodiment of the mother, and we can't take care of that either. And if we believe in past lives and incarnation, we also see that we have been embodied in both. So there's still something within all of us that needs to heal. And this topic has been very, very strong this week. And what's still happening is that so when you said to me that, when you just spoke about what Mary was told, or that she was not worthy enough because she's a woman, that makes me very angry, and that this is still happening. So her story is still happening, and now, in the time that we are now, this is the time when we also can raise our consciousness. So the shifts are happening very fast now, since we see what's happening in the world, and it's really Shakti, the Shakti acting out. So there must be change in our fundamental beliefs. But as we said, it's really hard to tell someone that only. So I see it as having heart-based spirituality or a mind-based spirituality. When you're mind-based in something, it can be in anything. It doesn't matter if it's a god, or if it's a color, or if it's weapons. Like, if you believe in that, then that's what you're going to do. And that's the problem now, that people are just following, like we're like just following the norms and the crowds around us, and we're being led to believe that we're not important, or that we are not divine. So that's a big issue. And yeah, I think that moving into this consciousness that you're talking about is really helping. If only one or two people are awakening this consciousness, then that's how it spreads, and we allow that others can also think for themselves and form their own belief structure.
Yes, there's a passage in the Gospel of Mary where Christ says, "Be on your guard so that no one deceives you by saying, 'Look over here' or 'Look over there,' for the child of God is within you." So there's a warning from millennia ago from Christ in Mary's Gospel, saying you have to go inward. You have to seek inward. You have to figure out what you know is true and begin to trust it and begin to follow it. And that couldn't be more relevant than today. That couldn't be more important. And it's up to us to do that work. It's up to us to find a practice that resonates, that allows us to return to, I describe it as the great big unsayable love. And it's an essence of the soul. It's a feeling of grasping in whatever way we can in that moment, that love's already won, and in aligning ourselves to be in service of love.
Yeah, it's really, it's beautiful to be on that path of love and devotion, because then everything else just can rest, and you can be based in that with everything that you do, and that actually creates. So when we create that peace within us, it really makes it easier to see and feel peace around us without needing to control anyone or control life, and just also be an observer, a seer in this life. And yeah, I love that. And I really love your oracle cards, and you really bring up these beautiful divine feminine embodiments of different cultures. And did you was this something that you created from your studies and in theology?
Yeah, they were the emphasis in my degree at Harvard. It was the focus was all on the voices of the divine feminine. So, and I gained so much, like I learned so much, and mostly, or the most incredible thing I learned was to trust that voice of love inside of me. So that's what I felt. An oracle is uniquely designed to help us return inward, and to trust that aspect of us that can guide us to our own wisdom. Because when you use an oracle, you ask a question, and then you're drawing, the wisdom from the oracle, But each of the cards then has a question, a soul voice question. So you can ask yourself, you can go inward with the 3 breaths and ask yourself a question when you're in the heart and listen for the answer. And my prayer and my intention with it is to help create the kind of intimacy and the kind of just trust and really union, like marriage, I felt like I have with my soul, and that I trust what I hear when I go inward. And that is what is most important for me to impart to someone else, is that not that they believe me or my truth, but they learn to hear their own.
Yeah, so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. That's really amazing. Is there anything that you want to share now, or how can people find you? And yeah, what are you sharing with the world right now?
My first name is has an egg in it, which is always, so people sometimes have trouble finding me because I'm a Meggan with 2 G's. So it's Meggan, and then it's Watterson, and that's my website. I am currently working on a new book that is focused on the acts of Paul and Thecla. So I want to talk about her incredible journey to baptizing herself. And then I'll be teaching actually at Omega this summer. I don't know if international travel is going to be possible, but I'm going to lead a retreat on Mary's Gospel on August 13th to the 15th at Omega. And I'm very excited about, because we're finally going to be able to gather in person in real life after a year and a half now of isolating. So that is incredibly exciting.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, for anyone who's in the US and interested in that sounds amazing. And we can't wait to have you here in Europe as well.
I know. Once the skies are a little bit more open.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll share your links in the show notes, and I want to thank you so much for joining this conversation today. It was so lovely talking to you.
Thank you. I'm very grateful we've been connected.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope that this episode did inspire you as much as my conversation inspired me with Meggan. And I've learned so much from her just through this talk. And yeah, I can't wait to also read the other books that she's written. And it's really a transformative way of seeing this old paradigm shifting into the consciousness of that the divine is if we see the divine as dualistic, it has to have both yin and yang, the feminine and masculine aspect, because that's when we heal it within ourselves. If we're imbalanced with yin and yang, we are not fully and wholesome way of being healthy, and we feel almost fragmented. So we have to create this whole within us, and to the relationship to everything in the world and to the divine. So I love this conversation, and if you do want to check out Meggan's website, you have the links in the show notes, and in the show notes you also have the links to for pre-ordering my book. And if you have any questions, just let me know. Let's take a deep breath in through the nose together, and exhale out. Om Shanti.